It's Tuesday, it's 9:30 Eastern Time, and you know what that means. It's time for the Combat Press Midweek Report. I'm your host, Eric Reinert, and I am honored to be joined, as always, by featured columnist for Bleacher Report, as well as the Bleacher Report's women's MMA expert and ranker, as well as that for the combatpress.com site, Riley Cobra Kontek. Riley, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great, man. How you doing?
Pretty good, thanks. As always, go to combatpress.com, check out all the latest news, opinions, and interviews about the world of mixed martial arts. You can follow Combat Press on Twitter at Combat Press. Make sure to like the Facebook page as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Reinert Eric, and I'll throw Riley's name up there real quick. You can follow Riley at Big Riles MMA for all the latest in his mind in the world of MMA and probably some other stuff, perhaps beer, hockey, other things of that nature. Chicago sports. So follow both of us for those things. Today on the show, we're going to talk about the two UFC Fight Night events that happened this past Saturday afternoon and Saturday evening here in the United States. We'll talk about Battlegrounds MMA, the one-night tournament from Tulsa, Oklahoma that aired last Friday, October the 3rd. We'll talk about a few fights coming up outside of the UFC this weekend, and as always, we'll have ourselves a Wrestling Minute. So once again, follow Combat Press on Twitter at Combat Press, and be sure to visit combatpress.com every day for all the latest in the world of mixed martial arts. MMA fans were pretty privileged, in my opinion, this last weekend because they basically just had a whole weekend slate full of mixed martial arts. On Friday, of course, there was the Bellator card and the Battlegrounds card. And then on Saturday, fans were treated to a double-header of UFC events, the first coming to us from Sweden, taking place here in the United States in the afternoon, and then the second card coming to us from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada that evening. Number of interesting results from those two cards, and I think the most notable would be Rick Story's pretty incredible win over Gunnar Nelson. I think most people had, or many people would have probably predicted Gunnar Nelson, who was previously undefeated, to continue his undefeated streak through a guy in Rick Story who, despite earlier success in the UFC, had kind of had a middling career as of late. But nevertheless, Rick Story stood tough and withstood Gunnar Nelson's significant attack to win by split decision. So, Riley, my first question for you, does this result speak more to Nelson's actual status among welterweights, a possible Rick Story resurgence, or both?
I think a little bit of both. Like I said on last week's show, that Story's move to Arizona and Benson Henderson's camp and John Crouch and all those guys, I think that's really benefited him. He's not just a wrestler anymore. He can kind of do it all. So I wasn't as surprised. Obviously I picked Gunnar Nelson, but I thought it was a very close matchup. And I'm not 100% shocked at Story's win, because Story, that's what he does. He makes other guys look bad, and we've seen that in the past, and that's what he did again. So and at the same time, I think Gunnar Nelson's not ready for the main event scene. So I'm sure that had something to do with it as well. So I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, as I said before, Rick Story had the impressive early career in the UFC, of course, winning over guys like Johnny Hendricks, the current champion, and Thiago Alves, who's been ranked among the top welterweights for quite some time. Then kind of took not a dive, so to speak, but has sort of alternated wins and losses. This is obviously his most impressive win as of late. Meanwhile, Nelson, sort of I would say one of the most heralded welterweight prospects. They meet, and like you said, Rick Story kind of does what he does and outlasted him on the scorecards. 1 year from now, who do you think will be ranked higher, Rick Story or Gunnar Nelson?
A year from now, it's probably going to be Rick Story. He got the win over Nelson. Nelson, this loss, although it shouldn't knock him that far down the ladder, it definitely derailed his hype train a little bit. He looked really good in the first round, I thought. I thought he won the first round, but then after that, Story kind of went on cruise control and took him. So I think Story's experience and his overall skill, more well-rounded than Nelson, with the wrestling and all that good stuff. He'll be ranked higher, but again, Nelson's still a young guy, and he's got a lot of skill, and he's going to stick around the top part of this division for a long time.
Do you think Rick Story is going to be able to use the momentum from this win and others, in his recent fights to cruise into a perhaps title contention in the welterweight division, or do you think we've seen the top of Rick Story's ranking, so to speak, back a few years ago when he was defeating guys like Johnny Hendricks and Thiago Alves?
It'll definitely be interesting to see because, like I said, that move to Arizona was huge for him, and it's going to continue to pay dividends for him. But, it's weird because he matches up well against a lot of the guys in the middle, like top 25, but the guys in the top 10, top 12, they're all vastly superior fighters to Rick Story. They're all well-rounded. The welterweight division is so stacked, it's ridiculous. There's guys with better wrestling than Rick Story. There's guys with better striking than Rick Story. He's going to be, and this may not sound great after the big win he just got, but he's probably going to be a gatekeeper. And he's going to be a guy that tests the up-and-comers, and he's going to be the one that they put in big fights, and, he'll come up short sometimes, and he'll come up big sometimes. I don't think he's ever going to break into the mold of top 5, and he'll be close. He can make it to the top 10, but I don't think he'll ever truly be in title contention with all the guys they got there.
We'll go back to another well-known welterweight title contender in just a little while, but Riley, I just want to dovetail off of something you said. I agree with you that Rick Story will probably be in the gatekeeper role, but I've never viewed that term as being bad.
No.
Like I realize that a lot of people kind of view that probably a lot of professional fighters as well view that term kind of derisively because it means you're kind of like one level below the elite class. But that still means you're better than a hell of a lot of fighters, and you're sort of the measuring stick for guys to see if they can truly contend in your division. So I've always thought of it as obviously guys would prefer to be title contenders than gatekeepers, but I mean, if you're going to be something in the world of mixed martial arts, it's nice to be that guy that the company can rely upon to put up against hot prospects to see if they truly belong.
Right, and tailing off that even, I mean, think about it. Roy Nelson is a guy that I would consider the heavyweight gatekeeper, and he headlines a couple cards a year.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong. You're right. There's nothing wrong with being a gatekeeper. You get paid pretty decently to fight, and you get some big wins. You get some, obviously you lose some of the big ones, but I mean, you're always around that top 10, top 15 spot. So, I mean, that means you're a great fighter. You're just not the best. So, I mean, obviously you shouldn't take comfort in that if you want to be the best. But, I mean, there's no shame in being a career top 15 guy. That's pretty respectable.
One guy whose career is still sort of up in the air given his youth is Max Holloway. He was successful on Saturday afternoon with a knockout loss, I believe it was ruled officially, over Akira Corassani. He's won 4 straight now, and all 3 of his professional losses have come against current top 10 fighters. I think it was Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and one other elite featherweight whose name escapes me right now.
Was it Bermudez?
Yes, it was Dennis Bermudez. So obviously Max Holloway's had a lot of success against guys, sort of in the middle part of the division. Come up against some trouble against guys in the upper part of the division, but now he's obviously had some more experience since fighting guys like Bermudez and guys like Conor McGregor. So, in his, I believe, like I said, it's his 4th straight win this past Saturday, so I think he belongs, gets a little bump up in competition. Certainly more than a guy like Akira Corassani, no disrespect to him, but he was obviously not somebody who most people would consider a contender. So Max Holloway, given that he's probably going to get a step up in competition, Riley, do you think he is going to see more success this time around given his greater level of experience?
It just really depends on his ground game. All 3 fights where he's lost, he's been exposed on the ground. And he, he has a lot. He's a young kid. He's got a long ways to go. I definitely think he's a top 20, top 25 guy. And he's proven it. He's a technical striker. He's a very accurate striker. He's a very powerful striker. He's got the physical gifts with the long limbs and the tall frame. But there's just a thing about him that if you get him to the ground, it's just he's not as comfortable there. It's going to take a couple of years until he's really, really ready to take a true ground fighter. I mean, you look at most of his wins; they're against fellow strikers, guys that usually aren't ground fighters themselves. So until he can prove himself against a wrestler or a guy with really good jiu-jitsu that can get him to the mat, he still has a ways to go. But I definitely see him as a blue chip prospect that you should expect to see in the title picture in the next 2 or 3 years.
Later on that evening, we saw a number of other guys who are currently in their division's title pictures. Of course, I'm talking about Rory McDonald, currently ranked second among the UFC's welterweights, and Rafael Assunção, who I believe is ranked fourth or fifth in the bantamweight rankings, depending on which rankings you're looking at. I think neither of these guys being victorious in their fights against Tarek Saffiedine and Brian Caraway, respectively, neither of their successes came as much of a surprise, because I think these guys are generally looked at as being next in line for their division's titles. So, unfortunately for them, however, the title pictures are a little clogged right now with the welterweight fight up and coming between Robbie Lawler and Johnny Hendricks, and of course Dominic Cruz getting the next shot at TJ Dillashaw's bantamweight title. So which of these two fighters, Riley, Rory McDonald or Rafael Assunção, will see his title shot first?
I think it'll be Rory McDonald. I think once Hendricks and Lawler settle their business in December, assuming, you can't assume this, but assuming Hendricks wins and there's no immediate rematch because of the Lawler win, I think McDonald's right there, next guy. Sunsau's got to wait for Cruz. And then, I still think that if Cruz wins, that Faber will get that third fight. It may not make sense, but because of the trilogy and the rivalry and all that stuff, if Cruz were to win the title, I think that Faber would be right there in the title mix. So Sunsau is probably going to have to take another fight, at least another fight, before he gets a title shot. And assuming, like I said, Hendricks beats Lawler, McDonald's the next guy, and I think no one can dispute that. Now, again, if Lawler wins and Hendricks gets an immediate title rematch, then McDonald will obviously have to take another fight. But I think Rory's probably next in line.
I think it would be a travesty if Rafael Assunção, a guy who has won 7 in a row, would have to take another fight before getting his bantamweight title shot.
That's the game, man.
That's the game. Rory McDonald, let's just, you said assuming that Hendricks is victorious. Either way, against Lawler or Hendricks, who do you see winning either of those fights against Rory McDonald?
I think McDonald is a bad stylistic matchup for Johnny Hendricks. So if McDonald was to face Hendricks, I think that McDonald could beat Johnny Hendricks. We saw the Lawler fight, and I think Lawler is just such a bad stylistic matchup for so many guys that McDonald, I don't think McDonald would beat him in a rematch. So it's really weird. Styles makes fights, and that's why sometimes you see championships change quickly, and other times that's why other guys hold them as long, is because they're so well-rounded. I think McDonald would beat Hendricks. I don't think he'd beat Lawler, and I think Lawler can beat Hendricks. I think Lawler was very close to beating Hendricks, and it's kind of like a triangle where any one of those three guys can beat each other on any given night.
Do you think, who else besides Robbie Lawler do you think in the welterweight division could defeat Rory McDonald at this point in his career?
Right now, I don't think anybody outside of Lawler or Hendricks is going to beat Rory McDonald. He's just so good and he's so well-rounded. We saw what he did to Tyron Woodley. We saw what he did to Carlos Condit before Carlos Condit had the comeback, and that was a long time ago when Rory was even a younger kid than he is right now. I think in a rematch, Rory would beat Carlos. So I think, honestly, the only two guys that can beat Rory at this point in time is Lawler and Hendricks. So, and like I said, I still think Rory would beat Hendricks, but it'd be a close fight.
The event in Halifax, Nova Scotia was almost like a TriStar Invitational, because we saw a number of fighters from that gym. Which of the 3 other fighters besides Rory McDonald on the main card, lightweight Chad Laprise, welterweight Nordine Taleb, and welterweight Elias Teodoro, will have the most notable UFC career?
I think it's Elias Theodoro. He was, like I said last week, he's one of my top middleweight prospects coming into the UFC, and he's just so good. He can be exciting and he can look for the finish, or he can just grind away at you. And him beating Bruno Santos may not be exciting, but he does a very good job at just holding guys down and making them look bad. And although it wasn't the prettiest fight, Theodoro did a very, very good job beating a strong, powerful guy like Santos, and I say, if not convincing fashion, pretty good fashion. So I think Theodoro's got the best chance of being successful out of the 3.
Where do you think he will find himself in the UFC's middleweight mix a year from now?
A year, it really depends, he's still a prospect. He's still undefeated and all that good stuff. He's gonna. If I were the UFC, I would give him a very slow path up the ladder because they're looking for Canadian guys that are marketable, and they're looking for guys. They're looking for not the next GSP, obviously. That's a megastar, but they're looking for guys that are gonna be at the top of the card in Canada. They're looking for guys that they can market to the Canadian market. So I think if they smartly build him up over the next few fights, I think he's a guy that could be big in Canada. And, like you said, you don't really like his demeanor. He could be a very good heel at the top of the card. A guy you want to see get his butt kicked. And then they put him against a guy of similar skill, and you see who the better man is.
I didn't like his demeanor on the Ultimate Fighter Nations, and it was more. I mean, I knew what he was going for, but he was obviously very respectful of Bruno Santos after his fight. So, I mean, much respect to Elias Theodoro and all of the other TriStar fighters with their successes on Saturday evening. It was certainly a good show, and not surprising to see all three of them win. Any other notable results that you wanted to talk about from either of the UFC fight cards this weekend, Riley?
I'll pick one from each card. The Sweden card, Mike Wilkinson knocking out Nicholas Backstrom. Whoof, that was a knockout, man. That was completely unexpected. Everyone thought that Nick Backstrom was just going to beat the hell out of this guy, and he just hits him with a one-punch knockout. And then I also want to give a shout-out, too, to my Polish brethren, Jan Blachowicz, who completely destroyed Ilir Latifi. Kind of as advertised, I thought it was going to go that way. A lot of people thought Latifi was going to be victorious. Not to plug myself, if you look at the Bleacher Report main staff predictions from last week, the only two guys to take Jan Blachowicz were me and Scott Harris. So, he was kind of an underdog that shouldn't have been an underdog. So those were two guys in Sweden that I was really, really good, happy about. The other one was in Canada in Halifax, and it was on Fight Pass, and it was the Albert Tumenov, that head kick knockout that he had of Matt Dwyer was so gnarly. It was just a thing of beauty and violence, and he's another guy that he's only 22 and a half or so, something like that. He's a young kid that, these Russian guys are taking the UFC by storm, man, and he's doing it in violent ways.
A couple of excellent cards for sure, and certainly good for the UFC to kind of keep rolling with the momentum of UFC 178 with the sorts of good results that they've seen. We'll see what happens with UFC 179, but that's another topic for another day.
Yeah.
Another card this weekend, a little less noteworthy for casual fans, and perhaps a little more noteworthy for more hardcore MMA fans, and maybe not for all the best reasons. Battlegrounds MMA brought back the one-night 8-man tournament that introduced most American fans to the mixed martial arts, or no-holds-barred fighting, as it was called back in 1993 when the UFC first made its way to America, or I guess formed itself in America. Joan Carneiro, or as Chael Sonnen and Jim Ross repeatedly referred to him, Honan, wins the 8-man tournament. Overall, Riley, just thoughts on the event, just as in general.
Oh, I mean, I ordered it. I ordered it last minute. I ordered it last minute. I was gonna go out, and then I was too tired, so I stayed in and I watched most of it. I fell asleep, unfortunately, before the main event and all that stuff. Yep. But I enjoyed it, honestly. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I honestly enjoyed the card a lot. I thought that a lot of times when you put these low-level guys on the card, they just go out there and put on a show. It's not the most technical stuff, but it was enjoyable. I liked the 8-man tournament. I think the first round was all finishes, and actually, I think other than the last two fights, I think they were all finishes. But I like the 8-man tournament. I wish some of the other guys that dropped out would have stayed because I was excited. But the one guy I thought would pay off, Joe Ray, won his first fight, so I was happy about that. My pick, Jesse Taylor, lost in the first round, so that just shows you that. Yeah, that just happened. They said that about 100 times. But obviously the most enjoyable thing was Chael and Jim Ross on the call. I mean, I was hooked just on listening. Like, at some points I would minimize my screen because I watched it on my computer, and I would do other things just to listen to what was going on. They did such a great job, and even the fact that they incorporated Showdown Joe Ferraro on the broadcast was I thought very good. So I very much enjoyed it. I thought it was $20 well spent.
Yeah, I agree. I did not wait till the last minute to order this. I was like, 8-man tournament Friday night. It's cold as hell here in Wisconsin this last weekend. So, I spent the $20 because I knew if I went out, like I said, I'd be spending a lot more. So, definitely worth the money, I would say. But also, notable differences between the quality of the broadcast between Battlegrounds MMA and UFC. But I mean, we're talking about
Well,
apples and oranges here.
obviously, yeah.
The one notable thing, and our colleague David Massey pointed it out via Instagram because he was there cage side, was the stark emptiness of the
Oh yeah.
arena. BOK Arena was obviously much too big a venue for an event like this, and they kind of learned that the hard way. I remember I turned it on, and basically the whole lower bowl was pretty much empty. And anytime you see that, that's not necessarily a good sign. So bit ambitious on the part of Battlegrounds MMA to have an event in such a large space. Um, I also agree that Jim Ross and Chael Sonnen did a fantastic job. Chael Sonnen, he had so many remarks that I don't think would fly in the UFC, and that was kind of, they just sort of like let him say whatever he wanted, like the part about how he doesn't like tattoos because he doesn't have any tattoos because he doesn't like needles with ink
That
in
was so
them.
funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
There were
was
a lot
great.
of nods to his indiscretions, so to speak.
Oh, that was so
Um,
funny.
yeah. So they did a good job. Do you think we'll see another Battlegrounds MMA event on pay-per-view?
I really doubt it. Like you said, the empty arena. And I actually was going to say that until you brought it up. You're right. It was dead in there, and I think they overdid the venue. I think they should have did like a convention center like Invicta used to do.
Yeah.
I think that would have been smarter. But I thought the overall production value was pretty solid. And like you said,
Yeah.
that some of the things that Chael said, wouldn't fly. Dude, sometimes that's cool though. I don't
No, I
like
know.
the over professionalized like broadcasting. Like I had a conversation the other day with my buddies, and we talked about how Harry Carey, and I'm not even a Cubs fan, but like Harry Carey used to get drunk all the time and call the games. That's why the games were exciting, is because you had this drunken maniac calling the game, and it was interesting. You didn't have all these boring guys acting professional. So I really enjoyed it, and one more remark on the commentating. I thought that Jim Ross and Chael actually started off a little shaky in the beginning, and I thought they leveled out very quickly. Like they got very comfortable with each other quickly on their feet. So that's just a nod to Jim Ross and his experience and how he's a legend in his business, and Chael just his natural charisma.
Do you think we'll ever see the two of them announcing for another company for mixed martial arts?
I really hope so. I think that honestly, I said this on Twitter. I think they have replaced any guy that I had at the top as my favorite announce team. I personally love Mike Goldberg and Joe Rogan. A lot of people crap on them for some reason, but I think that Jim Ross and Chael Sonnen is my new favorite tandem. I think they're just really good.
I'm a big Kenny Florian fan, just because I like Kenny
Oh,
Florian.
I like Kenny, but he can be boring, boring, boring.
I'm pretty boring myself, so I guess I find kindred spirit in Kenny's
Oh, okay. Is that
boringness.
what it is? All right.
Which weight class do you want to see another one-night 8-man tournament in?
I would love it, and this would never happen because I don't think anyone would ever make it out back to the cage, but the heavyweights, because the finishes would be fast, and you'd have a bunch of fat guys hurrying back to the locker room to chill, and then I don't know, I don't know. I like the fat guy, especially because the level of heavyweights outside the UFC is a lot of fat, tubby guys. But in all honesty, I mean, I'm kind of half joking about that, although I think that's great. But I think like a lower weight class, like a 25, 35, or 45 would be awesome to do that with.
Which heavyweight outside of the UFC do you think would win a one-night 8-man tournament?
Sergey Karitanov.
I got Bobby Lashley. I'm just
No,
kidding.
he would blow his gas tank so fast, it's ridiculous.
Do you think an open weight tournament is out of the question in 2014 in the United States?
Yeah, in the United States, yeah, with the athletic commissions and all the sanctions and stuff, you won't see it there. You'll see it in a place like Brazil or Japan, but you definitely will not see it in the United States, especially with the athletic commissions.
Battlegrounds MMA, it was certainly an interesting event, and I'm going to write about it a little later this week for CombatPress.com. You can check out our colleague David Massey's reflections from that event on CombatPress.com right now, so go ahead and check that out. A couple other fights to talk about from this coming weekend. This is one of the first weekends in quite some time that the UFC has not put forth and events. So
Yep.
it's time to step outside the octagon, so to speak, and into the circular cage or the hexagon or whatever these other organizations use. In the World Series of Fighting, former UFC welterweight contender Jake Shields is going to take on Ryan Ford. Ford has won 6 straight, and for whatever it's worth, is the World Series of Fighting Canadian welterweight champion, which is probably like the Intercontinental Championship or something like that. Meanwhile, Shields is 35, and he's presumably fighting mostly for the paycheck at this point. So do you think that this could be a trap fight for Jake Shields?
It's a weird fight, honestly, because I was expecting Jake Shields to take on like an established UFC veteran next, like a guy like John Fitch or something. And obviously Fitch is fighting for the title next against Paul Harris, but it's weird. It's a weird fight. It's not a win-win fight for Jake Shields because the first thing is if he beats Ryan Ford, it's like, okay, he beat a guy that not that many people know in the mainstream audience, but Ryan Ford is dangerous. He is a beast. This is a guy I really wish that was in the UFC, especially after watching him in Bellator and all that stuff. He's a guy that I got really, really high on his skills and his toughness and his grittiness. And obviously it's a coup by World Series of Fighting to get this guy inked, no pun intended. But, you know, Ryan Ford can beat Jake Shields. He has one-punch knockout power, and he has beat some really good guys in the past. Do I think he's going to win? I think Shields grinds him out, but he is dangerous, and if Shields loses this fight, man, does he fall down the ladder. And that's not even Ryan Ford. That's just a knock that he's on a guy that he should have been fighting a guy that's higher up the hypothetical ladder, is all I'm saying.
Do you think that Jake Shields or any of these other UFC cast-offs who now find themselves in other organizations could ever find themselves... Well, let me rephrase the question. We just saw Josh Berkman get signed to fight Hector Lombard. He, of course, was a former UFC fighter who went and plied his trade outside the UFC and won a few fights in a row and now is back in the octagon. Which of the fighters in a similar position, your John Fitches, your Yushin Okamis, your Jake Shields, has the best chance of kind of carving a similar path back to the UFC?
I don't think any of these guys at this point are going to be back in the UFC. They're not rookies anymore. They've peaked, I think. I think a lot of these guys have peaked in their careers, Shields and Fitch and Okami especially. So I don't think that any of those big names the World Series of Fighting has that are UFC veterans will make it back unless they do something incredible. Berkman, the reason Berkman is back is because Berkman, first off, he left the UFC a long time ago, and he went on a huge tear in the regional scene and then obviously in World Series of Fighting. Now, granted, he lost that fight to Steve Carl for the WSOF title, but other than that blemish, he has pretty much been almost perfect. He's been very, very good, and he definitely deserved his shot back in, especially considering he hasn't peaked in the UFC. He might have peaked as a whole, but he hasn't peaked in the UFC.
Josh Berkman ran into some controversy this week over talk of that fight with Steve Carl, and Ben Askren, who's considered by many to be the best welterweight outside of the UFC, was involved in that conversation in some kind of tertiary respect. Do you think Ben Askren will ever fight in the octagon? Uh-oh. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it looks like we might have lost Riley Kontek's feed. We will keep an eye on that and see if he comes on back. And I guess meanwhile, wait until next week for his prediction as to whether Ben Askren will ever fight in the UFC's octagon. The other fight happening this weekend outside of the UFC is Eduardo Dantas taking on he is the current Bellator bantamweight champion. He is taking on the Bellator interim bantamweight champion, Joe Warren. Dantas is currently ranked 10th in the Combat Presses rankings, and Joe Warren, obviously a very accomplished wrestler. So I was going to ask Riley about this fight. Let's see if he's back. No, it doesn't look like it. We will cover this fight next week in the next week's episode of the Midweek Report. Meanwhile, the Wrestling Minute. This is how we wrap up every episode of the Combat Press Midweek Report. Hell in a Cell pay-per-view is coming up the Sunday after UFC 179. I believe it is looks like it is the 26th of October. It doesn't look like there's going to be a title match. Right now we're seeing John Cena taking on Dean Ambrose early in the card for the right to face Seth Rollins later on that evening in a Hell in a Cell match. I'm kind of two minds about this because on one hand, you know, it sucks to see a pay-per-view go by without a title match because sort of that's why, other than sort of the other kind of showcase matches that we see on the premier UFC or WWE events. That's why people buy the events in the first place, is to see the title changes. But with a guy like Brock Lesnar, who's basically a part-time performer keeping the belt, that keeps the title scene on hold until, you know, the WWE feels like bringing him back. So on one hand, it kind of sucks because, again, there's no title fight or title match rather in the for one of the UFC or one of the WWE's premier events. On the other hand, though, the last two WWE events, we've seen Brock Lesnar take on John Cena with not exactly the same results, but I mean, Lesnar retains the title. So do we really want to see Brock Lesnar versus John Cena 3? Looks like we're back with Riley Kontek. Hey, Riley, how's it going?
I'm here, fella.
We will backtrack to the Wrestling Minute in just a little while. Let me get to the question that we were asking before. Will Ben Askren ever fight in the UFC?
It's up to him. He's got to stop being bitter, and obviously Dana has kind of mentioned or hinted that he would think about it and probably let it happen if the number was right. So I think it's up to Askren to stop playing this game that, you know, he thinks it's great to be outside the UFC and just kind of talk crap about the company, and I think just sign the dotted line. I think he's got obligations to ONE FC first, but I think after he's done with that, he should make the jump.
The other big fight taking place this weekend is the Bellator bantamweight title fight between current champion Eduardo Dantas and interim champion Joe Warren. First of all, Dantas is ranked 10th in the Combat Press's bantamweight rankings. Riley, do you agree with this ranking?
No, I think that's a little overrated. I just point to the Tyson Nam knockout loss. I don't think he's been taking on the highest level of competition, so I would not say that he's the 10th best bantamweight in the world. And just some of the guys that the UFC has just picked up, all these prospects. Honestly, if you've looked at the bantamweight division and the injection of new blood that they've had, this is the division to watch going down the line, especially with all the young guys that they've got. I think there are so many talented guys at 135, and I just don't think Dantas is well-rounded enough to compete with them.
When Joe Warren retires from mixed martial arts, he is, I think, 37 years old or something like that. He's on the wrong side of 35 in any case. How do you think his career will be remembered, if at all?
It's not that notable. He's a bigger star from his mouth than he is from his walk-in. So, it'll be, if he wins the title here, he'll be known as the two-division Bellator champion, which I don't know how prestigious that is, but it'll be that. And but I'll always remember him as the guy that Pat Kern almost murdered in the cage, and that Alexis Vila almost decapitated him with a one-punch knockout. So I think his mouth gets him a lot of his opportunities, and he has the skill set to beat Eduardo Dantas, but it's kind of a tailor-made matchup in all honesty.
Pick for this fight on Friday night?
I'll take Joe Warren just off of his wrestling. I think that his wrestling and his clinch work is going to be better than Dantas, and on the feet, the striking is going to be very similar. So I think that Warren can win this one.
All right, that wraps up the MMA portion. I was talking earlier about the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view and how it doesn't look like there's going to be a title match, and how I'm sort of, I guess anything can happen in the world of professional wrestling or sports entertainment, and it's still a few weeks out from the pay-per-view itself. But when you've got your presumptive number one contender, quote unquote, John Cena taking on Dean Ambrose for the opportunity to face Seth Rollins later that night, that kind of puts the current title picture on hold. And I was saying before how I'm kind of two minds about that, because on one hand, I hate to see one of the WWE's premier events go by without an actual world title match, because that's kind of why they put the events on in the first place.
Right.
But on the other hand, do we really want to see Lesnar Cena 3? I don't know. There's really no other number one contender that's emerged in the time since that would make sense to face Lesnar. So anything else would feel kind of like, when they put Cena against Randy Orton. Just feels very forced, and it's like, here's two top guys. We'll put them at the top of the card and see what happens. So I'm kind of two minds about how that's all shaping up, because, Cena versus Ambrose is probably going to be a great match. People hate on Cena, but when it comes to delivering when he needs to deliver, he knows how to do it. And, really either of the two matches later on against Seth Rollins is appealing. Of course, Rollins versus Ambrose would be the more appealing of the two by quite some margin. But I think Cena versus Rollins in a Hell in a Cell type setting would be very interesting. Riley, your thoughts in the Wrestling Minute?
Well, I'll touch on that before I get to what I wanted to talk about. I think the reason that the WWE is more apt to give us this kind of card without a World Heavyweight Championship bout is because of the whole network thing in $9.99. They think that it's okay now to give us pay-per-views because they have this network in the $9.99 standard,
right,
that they can give us a pay-per-view without a world title match, and I think that's bullshit. First off, although I do really want to see a Hell in a Cell between Rollins and Ambrose, the card always needs to have a world title match on it. Even if it was a throw together, Lesnar versus, I don't even care. It could be anybody towards the top, any face at the top of the card. That could underline Cena's shot at a rematch, while Cena takes care of business with Rollins and Ambrose and that whole mess. They could have easily done it. It was lazy booking on their part, which it seems to be like they're doing that a lot lately, is booking the shows very lazily. But I just don't see how you can have a pay-per-view and justify charging people to watch something when you don't have a world title on it. So, I mean, that's just my thoughts on that. Now, my thoughts kind of based off of what I said last week and how I don't want them to turn Seth Rollins into that goofy, childlike character, and it just continued again this week.
You mean Dean Ambrose?
Yeah, whatever I said. So, a lot of the things he did this week I loved, but again, the hot dog card and the mustard and the ketchup with the holster and that whole thing, I just smacked my forehead. I was just like, why are they doing this? This guy has an edge that is obviously connecting with the audience, and then they have him doing this childlike bullshit where it just screams of like Cena stuff, like stuff that Cena would do, and I don't want to see that. Like, I'm not an 8-year-old kid. I don't like that shit. So, and I apologize for my language, but
you're not an 8-year-old kid, so it's okay.
Right, exactly. I can drink adult beverages. But, I just think that Ambrose, he's got this, yeah, exactly. I just think that Ambrose has this edge to him that we haven't seen since like a CM Punk type guy that audiences want more of, but they don't want him acting like a goof. You know what I'm saying? Like the sliming last week and the hot dog cart with the mustard and ketchup this week was just so childish garbage that I just hated it. Otherwise, I liked Ambrose. I liked what he did. I liked how he ended the show by planting Cena with a DDT. I liked him showing up in the crowd at the beginning of the show when Rollins bailed on Cena in the ring. Just everything he does is good, and then they add in the stupid stuff, and I can't take it. I don't like my Dean Ambrose like that.
I thought they gave him his heat back at the end when he got to give John Cena basically like the double underhook DDT.
That's what saved him, I think.
Right. That's exactly. They're trying to walk that fine line because they need a face besides John Cena that fans of all ages can identify with.
Well, isn't that what Roman Reigns is for?
Yeah,
I know
Roman Reigns
is here right now, but you can. Right, but he's only going to be gone for like 6 weeks. You can't go 6 weeks without just have Cena carry the load like he usually does. I mean, you're going to ruin a guy that obviously fans are getting behind because he is this edgy guy that we don't see very often because we're restricted by the PG guidelines. And I don't take a lot of things Vince Russo says to heart because I think he's done so many bad things for the business of wrestling. But I was reading an article by him today. He says, how are we going to have a provocative storyline where we're supposed to interpret that Paige and AJ are doing lesbianic things and then have a joke about Seth Rollins having a vibrator in his suitcase, and then you have them do all this PG stuff where they're doing sliming and ketchup and mustard things? It doesn't make any sense. It's if you're gonna be PG, pick to be PG, and then keep out the edgy stuff, or else you're just sending mixed signals to your audience.
Let me ask, this is the bottom line here. How much is it going to really? I'm trying to think of how to word this. Have they gone too far to make you not want to see Dean Ambrose perform? No, they have not.
No, but it's getting to the point where if they keep up with these stupid, childish things that he's been doing the last couple weeks, that it's going to turn me off. And there's not many things holding me onto wrestling at this point because it's just not what it used to be. And I think you can tell from the Raw last night there was just so much filler and garbage and stuff that didn't belong on the broadcast. I mean, how many good matches did you get last night? How many matches did you sit down and say that was a great match?
I'll tell you this. I thought Hoda and Kathy Lee was just
Oh
gold.
my God!
That's sarcasm. That's sarcasm.
I know, but it's just like, why is that on TV?
Well,
and then next week they're having that Real Housewife of Atlanta on there. Like anybody knows who that is or cares who that is. Like it just reeks of desperation that the WWE is just trying to be accepted by the mainstream when they're always going to be a sideshow that's accepted by a large mass of people, but it's not going to be mainstream like it used to be in the '80s when Hulk Hogan was over and all that stuff.
Or even in the '90s when Stone Cold Steve Austin was like.
Even then though, that was like the bastard child of mainstream. Like nobody wanted to associate it with it because of its content and stuff. And at this point, the damage has been done that no one wants to do it anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's just so much garbage with that. And then there's very few things that the WWE are doing to hold on to me right now. Ambrose is one of them. This potential push for Luke Harper. That is very intriguing to me. I just see how they'll screw that up at some point. And then that segment they had with Rusev and The Rock, I would love to see a Rusev versus The Rock match. I don't know if I'm in the minority there, but I think that would be awesome. That build-up would be great. Having Lana and The Rock verbally spar and then have Rusev throw it in there, I thought that was very intriguing, actually.
Got three final thoughts on this wrestling minute here. Number one, I still trust Dean Ambrose to be able to say, no, this is stupid, this is going to wreck my character, and for a creative to listen to him because he has broken through to that level where he has a bit of pull. And I agree, they're walking a fine line right now with the childish stuff, but I still think that Dean Ambrose has enough control over his character right now to be able to say when it's gone too far. And I don't think it has yet. But again, you're right, they are walking the line. Number two, I think that I can't remember my other 2 points. So that was my number 1 point that I was going to make, and that I guess is it. Number two, one guy that is holding me on to wrestling right now is Bo Dallas, because I just think his character, the self-awareness there is outstanding in my opinion. And number three, I was just confused by what the WWE is going for by having Hoda and Kathy Lee on there, because it's not like they're looking for middle-aged women to be fans of their product.
Were they advertising something? I don't even know what that segment was about. And it was getting so booed that they had to keep on Adam Rose's song to drown out the boos, if you didn't notice that. It was like everyone there just wanted them to just get the hell out of the way. They were like, what are you doing? Like, there was no point to that segment.
I felt like they were almost trying to
advertising anything.
I felt like they were trying to troll the Brooklyn audience a little bit. And
they were not. They thought that it was going to go over well, and it did not. The minute they came out, they were like, no. Absolutely not.
I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they're trying to troll
Don't give them the benefit of the doubt. This is a company that we've given the benefit of the doubt too much to, and that's why they're in the position they're in. That's why that they're pushing the network so hard, is because they're losing money, because they're doing so much stupid, pointless shit like this.
They're in the position that they're in because they have no competition. That's why they're in the position.
Of course. That's what happens when you do that. You get complacent. That's why I wish WCW was still around. I still would be a WWF guy, but geez, oh, God, that was just unbearable to watch last week, or yesterday, whatever the hell it was. But please, before we let this wrestling minute go, just can you name, the good matches you saw on Raw last night? Name them. There was, one. It was the 6-man tag was the only good match.
Yeah, I fast forwarded through most of them. So It was
Ziggler and the Usos versus Stardust, Goldust, and Cesaro was the only halfway decent match on the show last night.
I got my Ring of Honor tickets for the Milwaukee show coming to town in March. So I figure all of the crap that I'm going to have to put up with WWE wrestling-wise will be made up for that night at Turner Hall in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Riley, if you have a chance, I recommend you make the short trip up to Milwaukee and join us at the show. It's going to be a fun
When is
trip.
that?
So like March 9th or something like that.
Oh, Jesus, that's so far away. What the hell?
Yeah. Well, hey, I got to get my tickets in advance so I can get my good seats.
Okay, well, whatever.
Yeah. Well, hey, this has been the latest edition of the Combat Press Midweek Report. Once again, follow me on Twitter at Reinert Eric. Follow Riley on Twitter at Big Riles MMA. Riley, how far are you away from the 1 million follower giveaway?
Well, let's see here. We're at about 250. Hold on, my internet is going extremely slow. Let's just say we're a little bit away. I have 253, so I'm going to need about 999,747 more people.
Tell your friends, ladies and gentlemen, follow Riley Kontek at Big Riles MMA.
We'll get there.
Also follow the wonderful folks at Combat Press. Make sure to like the Combat Press Facebook page and visit combatpress.com every day for all the latest news, interviews, and opinion from the world of mixed martial arts. That'll do it for this week's Midweek Report. I'm your host, Eric Reinert, for Riley Kontek. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, and have a good night.